And unfortunately, there's more bad news. That wealth gap is about to be even bigger. The greatest wealth transfer in history is about to take place, with $84 trillion about to be passed down from aging boomers to their children and grandchildren, which might seem like a sigh of relief with the price of everything going up, especially housing, but there's a problem. The top 1% of families in the US control 90% of that wealth that's about to be passed down, and the bottom 50% stand to only inherit about 8% of it, which means the rich are about to stay rich and the poor are about to get significantly poorer, especially as prices on pretty much everything continue to rise. And in this video, I'm going to discuss the disproportionate wealth distribution, the potential solutions, as well as how you can take matters into your own hands. But before we get into it, my name is Nolan Mathias, and if you want to thrive financially, this is the place for you. So do me a favor, hit the subscribe button so more people like you can see this video, and so you get updates as I make more videos like this. Okay, so without further ado, let's discuss the greatest wealth transfer in history. And this comes from a recent New York Times article. The greatest wealth transfer in history is here, with familiar rich winners. In an era of surging home and stock values, US family wealth has soared. The trillions of dollars going to their heirs will largely reinforce inequality. And the data is quite staggering. Millennials and Generation X stand to gain substantially as the trend towards giving while living among baby boomers starts to increase, as well as just in general the attrition that will happen from them passing. And this article is creating quite the buzz in the media. Just check out this clip from Fox News.
This is a setup, a warning of the ugliness to come. Quote, "The greatest wealth transfer in history is here with familiar, rich winners." End quote. That's the New York Times, the Bible of the left, laying the groundwork for the seizure of your money. They don't think it's fair that older people are rich.
Now, I'm going to steer completely clear of the political conversation around this topic, because I don't actually think it's relevant to the conversation. What I do think is relevant is understanding how we got here and then coming up with a plan to make sure that we don't find ourselves in the situation where we can't afford a home or to be able to live. So let's start by taking a look at the distribution of wealth, because this is where this story really begins. Because if you take a look at the wealth distribution in the US, and this pretty much holds true for Canada as well, you can clearly see that the amount of wealth in North America is unfairly distributed. Now, unfairly is a strong word here because it may be unfairly or it may just be disproportionately. It all depends on your view of the world, and whether you are on the left or the right side of this conversation, you are 100% entitled to your opinions on how wealth is distributed. But the problem is that the bottom half of people in North America only have 8% of the wealth, which means the other 92% is controlled by the top 50% or the upper middle class. And that becomes problematic as wealth is transferred from one generation to the next. Because while right now it may seem to be completely unreasonable to be able to afford a home, as wealth gets transferred, that will become more and more reasonable for a certain percentage of the population. Unfortunately, that wealth transfer will make it significantly easier for a large proportion of the population to be able to buy, which in turn will make it significantly harder for the rest of the population to buy. Because what's happened here is that baby boomers became wealthy primarily because they were the largest generation. In fact, significantly larger than the greatest generation and the silent generation before them. And it's no surprise that the baby boomers created a significant amount of wealth because of their vast size. The significant size of the baby boomer generation led to obviously greater demand for housing and greater demand for all goods, which means that those who were born in that generation were able to buy houses and buy stocks and bonds and investments, and were able to generate significant amounts of wealth. Because boomers who bought houses in 1983 have seen the values of those houses go up by 500%. And boomers who started investing in stocks have seen a 2,800% increase in the value of the S&P 500 in that time. Now, there's a conversation to be had about leverage, which basically makes the returns on housing and the returns on stocks pretty much the same, but that's for another video. But the reality here is that as boomers came of age, they entered into one of the greatest times with respect to building wealth that the world has ever seen. It was also the time in history where the wealth gap widened the most. And unfortunately, there's more bad news. That wealth gap is about to be even bigger. Because if you look at the distribution of population, yes, the baby boomers were a very large generation, but Generation X is now almost the same size. The millennial generation is even bigger, and Generation Z is even bigger than that. And guess what? Generation Z is about to enter the home buying age. which means we now have 3 generations competing for the housing supply that was built off the back of the baby boomers. And I don't think I need to explain why that is going to be problematic. Now, there's many solutions to this problem being floated around. The most common are wealth taxes that would see the wealth of Canadians and Americans taxed as it is passed down to younger generations. But there's some problems with those suggestions. Primarily, it is believed that wealth taxes would be struck down by the Supreme Court in the US and would largely be unpopular in Canada. But regardless of whether they were deemed unconstitutional or not, that's not the problem. The problem is that if those types of taxes were to be introduced, money that is within the North American system would be transferred to other countries, meaning not only would it not be available to be redistributed to poorer populations, but it would also no longer be invested in North America, meaning that the poorer would get even poorer because of the reduced amount of demand from those assets leaving the country, which means any sort of wealth tax, at least in theory from an economic standpoint, is probably going to widen the wealth gap even further. And I know it doesn't seem like it would work that way, but believe me, it would. It's like rent controls. When introduced by governments, they have nothing but good intentions. However, the one thing that almost all economists agree upon is that rent controls ultimately affect the poorest of the poor more than anybody else. And here's the other big twist. Do you really want to rely on the government, who is clearly doing a poor job of making sure wealth is distributed to this point, in order to make sure that they distribute it fairly in the future? Because if you're putting all of your eggs in the basket of the government needs to do something to make this more fair, well, you're probably going to be waiting a long time for them to be successful. And even if they were successful in conceptualizing the ideas, well, the chances of them executing them well are slim to none. So take whatever political stance on this that you want. But I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that if we're relying solely on the government to make things better for us as individuals, it's going to be a long time coming before that happens. Which is why I don't think it's worthwhile spending much time on the political conversation. Yes, it's an important conversation, but the more relevant conversation, I think at least, is what can you do in order to put yourself in a position where you can thrive financially? Which leads me to the last line of this New York Times article, which is the real question is not why are the rich rich or what to do about that. It is why are the poor poor and what to do about that. And I'm not for a second going to try to convince you that I know the answer to why the poor are poor. However, what I do know is that over the course of working with thousands and thousands of clients in the real estate industry and the mortgage industry, I've seen many people go from being poor to wealthy, and I've seen many people who never dreamed that they would be able to own a home actually end up being able to own one. And while I can't tell you what each of them did to break into the housing market, what I can tell you is that there was 3 common themes that allowed them to become successful and ultimately attain their goal, whether that was just simply owning a house and maybe paying off the mortgage or becoming incredibly wealthy. In fact, one of my very best friends went from dumpster diving as a kid for food to owning a $10 million company in the food industry. And I can boil his success as well as the success of many who have either broken into the housing market or who have created multi-million-dollar businesses down to 3 things. That's mindset, skill set, and actions. And let me explain what I mean by that. So there's 3 things that almost everyone who is successful have in common. And it all starts with mindset. The belief that you can succeed, the belief that you can increase your income, the belief that you can pay off your debt, the belief that you can save a down payment, the belief that you can qualify for a mortgage, the belief that you can own your dream home. And it's not just the belief that you can do those things, but the willingness to go out and find the way to get it done. Which leads into the second piece, which is skill set. Because if you want to increase your income, if you want to pay off your debt, if you want to save a down payment that seems astronomical, having a skill set that will allow you to increase your income or pay off your debt or get an education is hugely important. And when I talk about skill set, I don't just mean the tools in order to earn an income, but also the education that goes along with managing your money and getting better at what you do. And one of the most common things I've seen with people who find themselves in a situation where they meet their financial goals is that they have an education mindset. They know that the information that they need in order to succeed, in order to reach their goals is out there, and they go out and they find it. Which leads us to the third piece of this equation, which is actions. Because with the right mindset, with the right skill set and the right knowledge, the next step is to actually take action. And in a lot of cases, people have the mindset and the skill set, but they don't actually go and take the actions, which is why they never actually succeed. And what's interesting about these 3 things, the mindset, the skill set, and the action, is that if you can figure out which one is broken, you can pretty much guide anybody towards success. Because if they've got the mindset and the education, the financial education, so to speak, but they aren't taking action, well, you just have to go and get them to take action and focus on that. Now, if they've got the mindset and they're taking actions, but it's the wrong actions, all we have to do is fix the skill set. And if they've got the skill set and they're taking actions, but they're just not believing that it's going to get done, or maybe they're not setting their sights high enough, then what you have to fix is the mindset. And all three of these things can be fixed, and they can be fixed quickly. All you have to do is identify which of the three you need to fix at that time. And I can tell you right now, from the comment section in this channel, I can tell that a lot of people actually have a mindset problem. They believe that housing prices are too high. They believe that they will never be able to get into the market. And guess what? If they believe those things, that's exactly what's going to happen. But in the last few years, I've also seen people who had no business buying a house find a way to make it happen. Whether it meant renting out the basement for extra income or working extra jobs, the people who really wanted to get into the housing markets absolutely did. And the people who wanted to earn more income absolutely did. And in general, the people who wanted to break out of that bottom 50% absolutely broke out of that bottom 50% and found a way to build wealth. Because the real question here isn't what is the government going to do to redistribute wealth from the rich to me? Because that would be unfair. The real question is, how do I build my own wealth so that I can redistribute it the way I see fit? How do I build that wealth so I get to choose who benefits from it? And then once you've built it, do everything you can to help as many people in need as possible. Because we know that we'll do a better job than any government ever could of making sure the right people get that money. So I hope this message hit home, because if it helped even just one person decide that they were going to make their life better, it was totally worth it for me. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure you check out these ones right here.